listening to Radio Realty. I'm Christopher Story, your host for great adventures in real estate, broadcasting live from the corner of West Hill and the Sterling Highway, the home of the Story team and the nerve center of all things prosperous and possible. On the line with me in just a moment will be U.S. Senate candidate Joe Miller. We're going to find out why he wants the job, why he's suited for the job, and wants your vote. What difference can he make in Washington, D.C., and what difference can you make back here in Alaska? This portion of the program brought to you by the Homer News. Tomorrow's Homer News will feature an edition of an article about a woman on her 40th birthday. If you can imagine this, I'm 40 years old, and here's this gal setting the bar a little higher than I'd care for her to do. On her 40th birthday last week, she swam from the Homer Spit across the Kachemak Bay and landed on McEwen Flats. And how did she do it? Why did she do it? You can read all about it in the Homer News. That'll be tomorrow. And for those of you that care to, can go online tonight, usually by about 7 o'clock in the evening, and read the articles online, homernews.com. You'll also find out why the Ninilchik Emergency Services is suing uninsured patients for ambulance fees. The Green Dot program, read all about it, how they're making Homer and the surrounding area a little safer place, and some new restaurants, all kinds of stuff you don't want to miss at all in the Homer News, homernews.com. Thank you for being part of the program, Homer News. Well, without any further ado, he's a very busy man. His name is Joe Miller. He is running for U.S. Senate. On Joe's website, you'll read, he says, the choice for Alaskans in 2014 will be stark. Voters must choose between the easy lies of an insider politician and the hard truth of a reformer. Joe, I take it you're that reformer.
Indeed I am, Chris. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Now, before we get started, you're back in Virginia, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in the lower 48 right now. My son just had his march back from West Point. He joined as a nuke vet or as a plebe. Some of you may have heard about Beast Barracks. It's that kind of intense training period at the United States Military Academy back on July 1. And he just completed his 5-6 weeks of training. And they have an event called the March Back from the summer camp training area back to the academy. And I was allowed as a graduate of the United States Military Academy to march back with my son. It was just an extraordinary event, 13-mile road march, and I proved to Jake that his old man still got it, and had just a wonderful talk with him. It was just a wonderful experience.
It's like Zig Ziglar said, that he said, I think every father should be able to whip his son at least until he's 10. You got to let the kid know that who's still in charge. Well, listen, Joe, I mean, this is serious times, and I'm really grateful, and please tell your son that we are grateful and honored that he is willing to serve his country. We appreciate that. A friend of mine texted me the other night, and I just want to read part of his text. He said, Chris, I think it's too late for our country to be saved. And Joe, that may sound extreme, but a lot of Americans are feeling as though, yes, indeed, we are fundamentally being changed. Are we going to be able to recover, in your opinion?
You know what? That's a conversation that is had, it seems like, almost every other day with concerned citizens. They feel like, you heard it in the Romney campaign with, the 48, the tipping point, basically, the dependency class, and whether or not that's something that can ever be recovered from, as far as the vote goes. But then there's more serious concerns about where we're at with freedom, about perceptions of the national government versus the state government. There are economic issues. It's kind of, when you look at everything collectively, it leads many to kind of have this kind of depressive, can we actually lick it? Is it too late? And my answer to that is, it really, first of all, I don't think it is, but second of all, where else are you going to go? So what
Right.
does that leave you?
Right. Well, as Ronald Reagan said, this is the last stand on earth, and that's the question. Okay, so you're coming from Alaska. You're going to take, let's say that you're successful in your bid for the nomination. You're then successful in your campaign against Senator Mark Begich. You go to Washington, D.C. What can a freshman senator do to make a difference in this case?
Well, I think that the response to that is look at what Cruz has done. Senator Cruz has kind of changed the whole attitude in D.C., and sure, there's lots and lots of work to be done, but he's actually making a credible stand on the defending of Obamacare. And it may be that Obamacare gets stripped out of the continuing resolution. And that would just be a monumental success. Here you've got, just this huge jump towards socialism. Taking over almost 20% of the economy, and future predictions are even more than that as far as health care goes. and of course will be under the thumb of the same government that can't keep track of its own affairs. It's been so inefficient and everything else. It'll be very destructive. And yet, if you turn back the clock 2 years ago before Cruz got in, that was a discussion that wasn't even being had. I mean, I said defund Obamacare, repeal Obamacare back in the 2010 election, but nobody in the Senate at least was taking it seriously. And he's been able to actually cause there to be a debate on the issue. Rand Paul, his filibuster on drones, actually getting commitments out of the administration on that issue. There are things that are happening now with these minority senators. I mean, you got a handful, 3 or 4 senators are actually taking a stand on these important constitutional issues and issues on socialism that are causing, I think, some impact. And one more non-compromising senator is only going to help that debate, and I think push back against the administration even more. A senator can put a hold on an administration appointee. One senator through debate and filibuster can have a major impact. And so, I mean, I think that's something that can happen. But the other thing, Chris, that I don't think that we should lose sight of, is the fact that a U.S. senator can also use his or her position as a bully pulpit to change even the discussion at a national level. And I think in part you've seen that with Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul with respect to their views too.
Absolutely. So, absolutely, and to put a finer point on it, be it you or somebody else that is successful to beat Senator Mark Begich, I would point out to the success that Senator Begich has had as it pertains to pushing and passing Obamacare, and such that I call it Obegich care. If you go and look at some of the commentary and the press conferences and things that he was holding, he was instrumental as a young freshman senator to make a big difference. Now, you and I don't like and don't agree with what he did, but I think it's relevant to point it out that a junior, a first-time senator can make a big difference, to your point exactly. Well, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was a swing vote on Obamacare, not to mention, of course, the support that he gave it in the comments that he's made. Of course, now he's trying to back off of that.
Well, and that's my next question. Let me just ask you this. Senator Begich is running, and he's got a $4 million war chest that he has amassed over the last, this election cycle, according to Politico. So he's got $4 million. He's using a lot of it to plug up the airwaves with things that are announcing him as far from the president as possible, be it the NSA scandals with spying, be it gun rights and Second Amendment, repeal of Second Amendment rights, and so forth. He is running, Joe, as though he has nothing to do with the administration, but I can't separate the two.
No, and if you look at his record, you can't either. I mean, 90% of the time supporting Obama's legislative proposals. I mean, there are very few people that Obama can count on more than Senator Begich. And, he can sit back and continue with his millions to pop up the rhetoric that he's actually Joe Begich. I mean, if you listen to some of the stuff that he's been talking about with respect to the liberty agenda, he almost sounds like a libertarian candidate. The reality of it is, though, until this cycle, you've never heard anything like that from him. But look at his actions. And this is what we said in 2010 during the primary, and it's the same thing that we're saying now. If you're going to judge a candidate, you got to look and see not what they say, but what they do. And with respect to his record, that reflects who he really is.
It's also been said that it's tough to overcome the power of incumbency. If you're successful in winning the Republican primary, what can you do to overpower the seat? He holds the seat. I mean, there is an advantage to the incumbent, no doubt.
Well, I don't think Obama is very popular in the state, certainly reflected in the last presidential election, that he has got a long way to go to convince Alaskans that he's right, not just for the state, but for America. And given the fact that Begich is an Obama disciple, that gets us a long way in the general election. But I think also, building coalitions. I mean, I don't think that Alaska is going to see a stronger liberty candidate than Joe Miller in this cycle. We have been consistent and outspoken with respect to the NSA scandal. In fact, if you go to joemiller.us and look back last fall, we were broadcasting the fact even then that the U.S. government, the federal government, was recording all digital communications. That's even before Snowden came out with his disclosures, and before Tice came out with his disclosures in June, and the other whistleblowers came out with their concerns about federal wiretapping. And it's something that I've always viewed as a threat to liberty. But it's not just that. It's also the other infringements on constitutional liberties, the vote integrity issues. And those are things that even on the left, people can embrace. And when you're running as a U.S. Senator on the federal level, I think that a lot of the things that the Constitution leaves to the states, that even those on the left can probably overlook or not necessarily as concerned about, because they know that I'm going to fight against the feds and their overreach, not their overreach, but their infringement on our constitutional liberties, and see that as the more important issue, and as a result support me as their candidate.
Can ANWR be opened? And what did candidate Joe Miller in 2010 learn about himself in the process? We'll ask him that when we return here to Radio Realty.
We got tall old trees where we live. We're the only ones who live there where we live, so we do mostly as we please.
I'm Chris Story. You're listening to Radio Realty. This program will be aired back on our website later today, radiorealty.us, radiorealty.us. I forgot to announce the winner for the Mermaid Cafe Real Estate Trivia Contest earlier. I'll do that later. But right now, I'm being joined by Joe Miller. JoeMiller.us is his website. You can go read more about Joe. Joe, when we last left, I posed the question, will and can ANWR be open for drilling? And let me preface this question by saying, if you listen to some of Senator Begich's ads on the airwaves right now, it almost sounds like he's saying permits are already pulled and drilling has begun. And I'm at a loss.
Yeah, I guess I'm at a loss too. I mean, his buddy Obama has done everything he can to stop development in the state, and I think will continue to do so. I think the best hope of opening ANWR is to make sure that we've got a Republican majority in the Senate, and we've got a strong alliance so that when Obama is finally out of that office, he can no longer veto any proposal that would open up ANWR. Here's the concern. If we don't open ANWR, and if we don't open up the resource base in the state, the hydrocarbon resource base, we are going to get lost basically in the dust of the Dakotas development. And of course, it's not just what's going on there with the massive, massive production, but it's also the other discoveries that will probably lead to more production in other areas of the lower 48 as well. I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface of what's in the Rockies right now. And, as more and more of that production comes to the fore, and by some estimates, already we're a net energy exporter by some estimates, but by 2020, by some estimates, we'll be a net crude exporter. I mean, who would have thought that 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
And when we get to that point where we've got already other reserves in the lower 48 providing so much crude that we're a net exporter, what do you think that does to America's national park? Well, it kind of creates a permanency to that status. And so now's the time to push back before we're there. And if we continue with a democratically controlled Senate and with people, allies of Obama like Begich in office, it doesn't matter whether or not, he personally wants to open ANWR. And I'm not going to, get to what his true motivations are. But by supporting this president, he pretty much assures that there is not going to be an opening.
I think, and I will speculate as to his motives, I believe that it's to get the best and next committee appointment chair possible, and to stay in that office until he's a very, 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 very old man. And that's my assumption, and I'll say that loud and proud. I just think that he's a career politician, and he doesn't want to go anywhere else. Okay, that all said, this is not your first time at bat. What would you say, Joe Miller, you learned in the 2010 election that you'll take away, use for you and for the campaign going forward here as you enter this primary? And what was the big takeaway for you?
Well, there are lots of takeaway. I mean, you can't go through a process like that and not come out not just a better person, but also somebody that's learned and gained a tremendous amount of experience. That was our first statewide race. And if you recall, Chris, we started that race April 19th of 2010, so just a few months before the primary. I was effectively the campaign manager in the primary. We did not have time for much in the way of organization. And then, of course, in the process of the general election, just a short, really intense 5-week process there. This time around, we're getting started much earlier, not just, of course, with fundraising, but also with organization. We've learned the importance of that organization. We've learned to trust our natural supporters. What happened in the 2010 race is we went outside of that base of supporters in the general election and allowed some national folk in that really didn't have our interest at heart. And by the way, there is a book. We've said this a number of times on other programs. There is a book that's been written on that. It'll be out soon. that describes some of the things that happened in that race and also what we've learned as a consequence of it. And I think anybody that's interested in what happened in that should get a copy of it. It will be really revealing about that whole process.
Some people have asked me when they learned that you were going to be a guest on this program, can this is their question to me, and I'm going to pose it to you. Can Joe Miller, if he wins the bid there for the Republicans, can he beat Begich? And you say?
I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, you've got Begich right now that has that Obamacare noose around his neck. And that's something that is going to drag down every Democratic senator that supported it this next cycle, especially when those premiums start jumping up here in Alaska, which they most certainly will. But it's not just that. I mean, he supported a failed presidency, one that's an enemy to liberty. And that's something else that even though he puts out these ads, Alaskans aren't going to buy that. In fact, if you look at how his popularity has dropped since he began his advertising campaign, announcing his opposition to the NSA and these other, silly things that don't at all mirror his record, I think Alaskans are smarter than the ads portray him as, and as a result, I don't think that's going to work for him. Alaskans don't want somebody like Begich that supported the agenda of, the Obama administration that's been so detrimental to Alaskan interest and to liberty overall. And I think that Alaskans are going to get to know me a little bit better, too, as we progress through the primary and general elections in such a way that will broaden our base.
A text message just came in, Joe. A listener wants to know how, if you're successful, how would you work with Lisa Murkowski, Senator Murkowski?
I went up and talked to her in January of this year, had a very cordial conversation. The entire delegation nominated my son for West Point, so I went up and I thanked all of them. Representative Young was out, so I had to talk to his staff. But, I had a good conversation with Murkowski, and here's the deal. And this is one of the reasons why, some have asked, well, are the Murkowski supporters going to support you for the nominee? And, of course, most of them will. And I don't want to sound presumptuous, but, she is on the short list to be the chair of energy, and, of course, her seniority gets her certain places. And her supporters are not going to want to see that sacrificed. And they know that they need another Republican in the Senate to assure her of that position. And that, as a result, even though they may not love me, the fact of it is they know that I believe in the platform and that certainly that will assist her in that position. So I think that's something else that people need to keep in mind is that we're going to work together to put forward Alaskan interests. Certainly we are not going to see eye to eye on many, many issues. That came out in clear contrast in 2010. But I don't think anybody can challenge that we're going to be in D.C., obviously, working so that my kids can preserve the opportunity for jobs in Alaska. I think I really believe that I can have a positive influence on her in regard to those things that we need to do as well to ensure that those opportunities are preserved.
Joe Miller is the guest, joemiller.us. If you want to learn more about Joe, it's called Restoring Liberty. It's his website. Joe, thanks for being part of the program today.
Well, Chris, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And don't go anywhere. More to come here on Radio Realty.
If you're lost and alone, or you're sinking like a stone, carry on. May your past be the sound of your feet upon the ground. Carry on.